Welcome back to our podcast. We are carrying on with the discussions of relationships, and we are going to focus a bit on intimacy. I think something that is needed to be discussed. And yeah, okay, Jordan, take the reel.
Well, I think you had a very good question for me here, so you can go ahead and ask that.
Where is the line in a relationship?
Between?
Between what you can and cannot do in terms of intimacy.
I was gonna ask you this question. I have it written down. Oh, okay. Something just popped into my head now. Um, if you can do, okay, within the Christian context, if you can do what you want to do intimately and still feel close to God, then I think it would be appropriate. But if what you're doing makes you feel guilty and makes you feel like, I don't know, I don't wanna pray right now, it makes you feel distant from God, then perhaps you are being inappropriately intimate. So, is there a element of guilt to how you're feeling or not? But I would love to end my answer there, but I understand the level at which you feel guilt very much has to do with how you were taught as a person. So there is the presupposition that if you were taught right and you've already established what is appropriate and you have a close relationship with God, then you can, I would say, lead it by your relationship with God. But nowhere, it doesn't really say anywhere in the Bible you're not allowed to kiss or you're not allowed to hold hands. I want to almost say it's vague about that, but it is clear on the line. You shouldn't be intimate with your partner, like the ultimate intimacy. It's very clear about that. But can I kiss? What kind of kiss? Cheek kiss? Are any of them appropriate? But yeah, that's the short answer to my question is can I do it while still feeling non-guilty, and will I be able to pray afterwards and still feel close to God and happy then? Yeah, that's my answer. Well, what's your line?
So I think there's two phases or two angles. I think you can look at this, and that's why it becomes so confusing. The first one would be there's a personal definition, and then secondly there's a general definition that we need to define first. So the first one is based on scripture. God says don't be sexually immoral. And it's like, okay, cool, that's the line. Okay, but then what is considered sexually immoral? All right, then I'd say, okay, based on how sexual moral stuff occur is anything that's sexual within the confines of a covenant of a marriage. So that would say to me anything sexual outside of the marriage would be what is defined as sexually immoral. So it's doing anything that was meant for the marriage outside of the marriage. Okay, very Christian perspective. So now the question becomes, okay, what is sexual? Because is holding hands sexual? Is giving a kiss? When does it become sexual? Because funny enough, our brother Paul says, greet your brother with a kiss. So that's like, that could be considered sexually immoral because I'm definitely not married to him. And it's a kiss. So many people would say kissing is sexual. But then I'd say, okay, but a lot of people give a kiss to their parents, give a kiss to brothers and sisters and family members. In some countries, it's common practice to give a greeting with a kiss. So obviously to them, it's not sexual. And some people would say, whoa, that's a bit much for me. So this is where I'm saying the personal definition comes inside. Whatever is sexual for you is where the line is of crossing. And that's such a gray statement because anyone can now say, well, I'm going to pretend that it's all the way over there and now I'm going to enjoy myself. But it doesn't work that way because you can't lie to God. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you can't lie to yourself either. So a good rule of thumb for me would say anything that leads you into temptation, or like you said, you don't feel comfortable doing that within the presence of God, or even it's just something that you wouldn't even tell your parents about openly or comfortably. So like you can kind of put yourselves in those kind of mental scenarios and then find out what it is that you really think is the sexual stuff. And even if it's not sexual, but it leads you into temptation, and someone has mentioned or described this to me, sexuality being like a wheel. If you start the wheel, if it starts rolling, it's going to gain momentum and it's going to be very difficult to stop. So don't start spinning the wheel. So whatever that is that makes the wheel start spinning for you, and if it's holding hands, stop holding hands. I mean, dang, it's not rocket science. If it's gonna start spinning the wheels, don't do that. But the reason it's a gray definitions game is some people might come up and say, no, this is fine for me, and other people will say, but no, this isn't fine for me, and they're trying to make a rule out of it, like this is what God's line is, but it's not God's line. It's a line that's going to be based on what leads you into temptation, or that ruins your relationship with the person. Yeah, that's where I'd say the line.
I really like that, because it does accommodate for different lines. It would be great to have an absolute here, but then that's just not possible because it's not biblically defined enough for us to make an absolute line. So you can then still make a personal absolute line, which whatever leads you into temptation. And I think this also depends on how old you are. I can see older couples. I mean, let's say you've already had kids. You've already been divorced once. Holding hands most likely is not going to arouse any sort of sexual momentum. It's going to be more about comfort and more about, because then perhaps your sexual what's it called now, desire is a bit lower. So you do certain things out of more physical, like emotional needs that younger people would get them riled up. So it's a very good, I think it's a very good way of defining it, which is if it gets the reel going, then don't do it. But it's still tough because, I mean, I know if when I was a teenager, like touch my arm, man, and that's like enough. So that's what's difficult about a definition like that. It really draws the line. You really have to look within yourself and be honest with yourself. That's the most difficult part of it.
Yeah.
But so, I think it's a very good definition. I like that.
If someone asks you, where's the line? Or asks me that, I'll say, you know where the line is. Just look for it. You're pretending not to see it so that you can walk over it and try and not feel guilty. And that's unfortunately not the case. And even Jesus does teach it's not only in what you do, but even what goes on in your heart. So if you're driving with your girlfriend and you put your hand on her leg and it's all nice and stuff, but if your thoughts are then going in the wrong direction, then that is over the line, my friend. So I think that's a very important thing to mention as well, because we forget it's not only the physical wheel spinning, it could be the mental wheel as well.
Yeah, I really like that answer. Right, I have another question for you. It's leading from this question, but it's also a very general question, but I think it's a good thing to discuss. So we've talked about levels of intimacy and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, but a lot of what we've spoken about is physical intimacy, and I want to focus a bit more on emotional intimacy.
Okay.
Particularly within the context of people outside of your relationship. So a lot of people say, or have the opinion, that you can have friends or you can't have friends of the same gender while you're in a relationship. So I'm in a relationship right now. Can I have a friend that's a girl or not? So I think I want you to answer that question. Can I have friends while I'm in a relationship of the same gender? And what's the nature of that relationship? And then from an emotional perspective, where are the boundaries? At what point am I cheating emotionally?
Okay.
Those are my two questions.
So I I have a set way of thinking about this, but obviously, if I enter into a relationship one day, I think you should, as a rule of thumb, have this discussion with your partner and really
Yeah.
understand what their perspective is, and then you guys need to kind of meet in the middle or know that it's not going to work, because this can be a deal breaker for a lot of people, because now I'm forcing you to get rid of your friends when you don't want to, and now I'm the bad guy and you're going to hate me for the rest of your life because of it. It's such a troublesome thing. I think having this discussion early on can save you guys a lot of trouble. But my view is, if I have a female friend and we're very close, so I'll use an example. There's a female friend of mine, my first friend I ever made, best friend, grew up together. She moved away and stayed in contact. In matric, we went to our matric dinners together. Uh, Still in contact ever through varsity, everything. So she's a lifelong friend of mine. And obviously, if I enter into a relationship with a girl now, she cannot expect me to just never talk to this friend of mine again. That's I think absurd expectation. But there is a respect towards my relationship with her that I need to take into account now within my friendship with this female friend. So I think cutting off friendships that you already have is not a good thing. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. But when you're in a relationship, to build new friendships with other women, I think there it becomes tricky. Okay, so obviously, if it's in a group setting, maybe at home group, even or at church, you meet someone new, that's fine. You're not gonna run away every time someone introduces themselves, but you're not gonna be intentionally trying to get to know them better. Okay, so there's the two differences. It's what do you already have a relationship with them when you enter the relationship, and or not. Now, the thing is, when it comes to emotional intimacy, now that I've entered the relationship, the level of respect towards the relationship I mentioned is, I will not personally be spending one-on-one time with any female friend when I'm in a relationship, purely due to respect and understanding psychology. So, I know, and we were taught this as business etiquette. People like people who are like themselves, and we also know the more time you spend with someone, the more you are going to become like each other. And we see this within relationships, and we see this in various types of scenarios. But if I have a female friend and I'm spending a lot of alone time with her, we are going to start, I would say, becoming more like each other, agreeing on a lot of stuff, knowing where we disagree, and that form of getting to know them deeper and deeper and deeper is going to fundamentally build a level of trust. And wherever there's trust, there is the possibility to invest emotions into that person. And I think, to an extent, if that a relationship already exists, that's fine. If you know where your boundaries are, that's fine. But carrying on building that relationship has no value if you've committed romantically to someone else. So I wouldn't cut any female friends off, but I wouldn't be spending alone time with them, going for coffee with them. If I still want to do something with them, I'll invite my partner with me, because what value does a female friend have in my life if I'm going to be sharing my life with someone else? So I would say, me and my partner have now, or are practicing to become one, as is within the marriage, and therefore my female friend is no longer just my friend, but she is our friend. And the same goes to her male friends. Her male friends, I have no problem with them. I might have a problem with the fact that she wants to spend alone time with them. If it's obviously be reasonable. If there's like their parents died or something, or it's a case where they made plans, you were going to be there and now you can't be there, then you can't force her to cancel the plans. If it's in public, it's fine. But there's scenarios. You guys are going to have to discuss this, in what scenarios you think it's fine or not fine, and then respect each other's boundaries when it gets to that. And it's not a matter of fact of, I have a jealousy problem. It's a more of a fact of, I understand the impact that it has on someone, even on myself, to the level of I don't want it to impact me that way, but it's going to impact me that way. If I spend time with a female, especially if I have problems in our relationship, I'll want to ask her for advice. If I'm asking her for advice, we're building trust. She's going to be like, oh, but this should have happened. And she's obviously going to choose my side because she's my friend. And I'm going to be like, oh, why can't my girlfriend just act like her? And now there's going to be comparison. And that's just a whole thing you want to avoid. So that's my rule of thumb. Yours?
Okay. I see where you're coming from, but I actually have a slightly different opinion. I think you can have friends of the same gender, or opposite gender, but this is the line. Within a marriage relationship, it's reasonable that you will be together most of the time. Outside of that, if you're not living together, it's very reasonable that your schedules will not always line up to go and see your friends together. So it's very reasonable for a healthy and platonic relationship to need to meet up outside of the two of you. And then the decision is, should we allow this to happen or not? So personally, what we've decided in my relationship is the frequency at which you're doing intentional meeting up with another person matters a lot. And you need to agree on that. So it's very easy to do this when you do it in an example. If you have a friend from school and you meet and you like catch up every now and then, I don't see you once a year having coffee with this person, no problem. But once a month, no, that's too much now. So you can still maintain relationships, but the frequency of intentional time together matters, I would say, the most. And it really kind of agrees with your idea, because that's precisely what building the relationship entails, is frequently spending alone time with this person and getting to know each other in a certain way. If you limit that frequency, then there's no growth, there's a limit of trust. So the frequency of interaction and communication, with one condition: if they like you, it all falls away. So if the guy likes my girlfriend, and I know that, if she, God forbid, if she was like, okay, I want to do something, they would be on it. If you know that there's any romantic interest from their side, it completely falls out of the door. No intimate time, no catching up. That's just not allowed. But in the case of platonic relationships, I would just agree on a frequency, which for me, I think I would say more than once every 3 months is a bit much. But otherwise, hey man, go see your friend, catch up. That's all right. But, also be an adult about it. Don't go clubbing and drink with this person. So there's a lot of boundaries that you have to define within it. But I do think you can maintain relationships in a healthy way. Yeah.
But here's the curveball.
Yes.
What if you suspect the person of liking your partner, but they deny the possibility?
If I have reasonable evidence for my suspicion, my partner should respect me enough to take my suspicion seriously, and I think act on it. The way that she decides to take that into account, I don't think needs to be extreme, like, okay, cut communication completely, but I would want the nature of their interaction to change to facilitate the way that I feel. So if I do suspect it and she's like, what I think should happen there is, if she really finds the relationship very valuable, to see this person every once in 4 months, I think that's fine within a certain setting. So, okay, meet up when there's a couple of people around, or I need to be there. It definitely closes the boundary of what's possible, I would say. And I would hope that my partner takes my feelings into account. But that's also so difficult, because what if I'm unreasonable in my suspicion, which I think a lot of people are.
I think actually it's actually easy, because if I am committed to a relationship with with my girlfriend in this example, and she has any suspicion, based or unbased, she has uncomfort with me spending time with other girl. That girl could be the girl I grew up with, and she might think purely because she's an attractive woman, I'm not comfortable with you guys spending time together. Obviously, that's like, what is she supposed to do about it? You know, it can feel very unreasonable, but my commitment towards the relationship and my respect towards my partner should facilitate my actions to change, not because it's reasonable, but because I respect how she feels. And I think that is why in my head it's quite easy, because she doesn't have to have reason for it. But if she feels that way, I'm gonna respect that way. And as you said, it's not a I cut the relationship with the friend off. I'd rather just change the dynamic in which we meet up, because obviously then it's no harm, no foul. It's just gonna take more effort from my side to act in a way that respects my partner. But if my partner wants me to cut them off completely, that's a whole different ball game. And I think then the partner might become unreasonable based on the level of friendship you have already built with the other person. But I think it's actually quite easy in the sense of your commitment towards each other will facilitate the amount of effort you should be able to put into adjust other relationships or friendships to fit around your romantic relationship, because that should be that focus, that should be that priority. And if your relationship, if and this is a common thing people say or feel or would express, I feel our romantic relationship is taking away from my friendships, as if it is a bad thing. I think it's a purely natural thing. I think it's a purely good thing, in sense of that should be your priority. Naturally, other things will become less of a priority for you to put your focus here. And people that don't like that, I would question their commitment towards a eternal, lifelong future with this partner. Because if your friendship with a girl is more important than your relationship, romantic commitment with another, I question where your priorities are.
All right, I'm going to put some rebuttal in that. I do agree with you for the most part, but how would you respond as a partner if I said, you can spend time with your ugly friend, but this friend is really attractive, so I don't want you to spend time with her. So then the nature, the dynamic of your interaction needs to change with the hot friend.
I'd say,
how would you respond to that? Is that reasonable?
I'd say, oh, dearie me, you're being quite superficial, but I respect your feelings. And then I would act accordingly. Yeah.
But wouldn't you say then that it's hard to... You need to also look at whether the way that your partner is feeling is reasonable within the relationship. And the example that I gave there comes from a place of, I want to say, insecurity about how that they look compared to your friend. So it doesn't come from a place of boundaries or what they think is right and wrong. It purely comes from a place of, well, I feel insufficient and insecurity. So is it fair then, to what extent should you act on your partner's... I think I'm going to have to reword this a bit. You cannot simply accept everything your partner feels and act on it, because all of us have unreasonable feelings. That's just the nature of being human. So I would say there's a step there that you're missing, which is quite a deep dive into what is making the person feel that way, and then a agreed upon or negotiation of, is it reasonable to change things because of this, or should we address it another way? And my example, or just kind of how I would lead on with that, is to say, well, you don't have a problem when I'm with this friend because you see her as less attractive, but with this friend you do. So should we really now change the rules just because of, I want to call it, an unreasonable expectation from your side?
I think you should, because you say I might have skipped a step. I think you're adding a dangerous step, because does someone, when it comes to your partner, and obviously we are guys, we like to logically approach things, and she might be much more emotionally inclined, does her emotions have any less value if they're unreasonable? And I don't think so. I think they're equally as valid if they're reasonable or not reasonable, because I don't commit myself to you only when you are being reasonable. I commit to you for who you are, and when you feel in a way that's unreasonable, due to my commitment, due to my love for you, due to my respect for you, I will act accordingly. I will try, because that's my priority, to make you feel like the way I want you to feel. I want to be a good partner for you. I don't want you to deal with this uncomfort, because obviously I'm making a presupposition that they're not being on purpose. I'm assuming that they are just feeling uncomfortable, they are feeling insecure, and that's not their fault. And I'm not gonna hold that against them and be like, no, you're being unreasonable, so your feelings are invalid. So I'm gonna go spend time with them on the same way, because it's not about the reasonability of her emotions. It's about the fact that it's her emotions, and I respect her emotions, and I want to be a good partner. So I don't think I'm skipping a step, but I could be.
All right, now what about if she says, I don't want you to spend time with your friends like that, but I want to spend time with your friends like that, and you are actually fine with it? So let's say, for the sake of let's make this easy. You can be in a restaurant where there's people around. Okay, that's like, let's say that's the rule that you set up. You're comfortable with her doing that, but she now says she's not comfortable with you spending any alone time, even in the context of um, a, a restaurant. She doesn't want that anymore because of how it makes her feel and her emotional insecurity. But you're secure enough for her to do that. So are we going to have, I want to almost say, different scaled expectations within the relationship, and we're going to be fine with that, just to honor her feelings and her commitment to you, even though they are
I think,
unreasonable?
yeah, I think that's fine. It feels wrong. It feels unnatural to say, but I think to say or to have the mentality, which actually feels unreal as well, that all of my boundaries are going to be the exact same as your boundaries, is quite, it's not real, it's not realistic. I think so. If I'm comfortable with it and she's not comfortable with it, it's not a matter of now I'm comparing my boundaries with your boundaries, and because I'm comfortable with it, you're supposed to be comfortable with it, and since you're not comfortable with it, I'm gonna cut it off from you because you don't deserve it if I can't get it. That becomes very toxic. That becomes very bad. So
Mm.
I think if I'm comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it, and if she's not comfortable with it, I respect that and I'll act accordingly. But obviously, yes, with the whole expectation conversation, she can't force upon me not to do these things. I should note, the way I act is I act in these ways because I want to, for her. And if I don't do that, I don't want to do it for her. And that's all it means. And if she's gonna force it upon me, most likely I'm gonna want to do it even less. But that's the whole thing of, if your relationship isn't based on expectations, there's gonna be the, honey, I am very uncomfortable with it. I understand it's unreasonable. I understand that you're comfortable with it, and the vice versa. But this is how I feel, and I ask that you respect that. And I'll be very reasonable, and try and respect that as much as I can, even though it's unfair if you compare it.
I think I hear you, but even though you try not to be fair 100% in a relationship, you should not request someone to do something that you aren't willing to do yourself in a relationship. And so,
Ideally.
I mean, ideally, you should not expect stuff of other people that you aren't willing to do yourself in a relationship. So, it doesn't have to be perfectly fair, but it's extremely dangerous to have completely different expectations of each other when it comes to the boundaries of a relationship. I don't think very different boundaries is healthy in any way. And what you'll particularly find if you allow that in a relationship is the person that is more easily feels things and expresses things will have a way more boundaries for the other person than they will have for them. And you'll typically find this dynamic of women are able to outline a lot of boundaries, and men don't really know how they feel, so they're like, no, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. I almost want to say they're more accepting. So I don't think you should make it too personal. I think you should be willing to have a degree of rules. If this is what we're going to do, then this is what we should do in general. And the reason I say that is because if it's now coming from her, let's say, insecurity, now she's not dealing with her insecurity. Aren't you facilitating something within her that she perhaps needs to deal with? And I know I'm using a woman as an example a lot here.
Yeah.
You can also use over jealousy in a guy and saying that we can almost be allowing this type of behavior instead of red flagging this and then dealing with it and then allowing a more healthy compromise, as opposed to, this is the way you feel, I respect it. I think there should be a lot more negotiation that happens there, and there should be quite a large degree of fairness that happens as well. You can't expect the other person to do stuff and then I'm still going to do it. I think as a partner, if you say, I don't want you to see anyone intimately anymore, you should also not see anyone intimately anymore, and it should be an agreement between the two of you. It just seems more healthy to me that way. I can't really describe why.
No, I understand why. I can see the practical value of it in many cases. I think that's definitely something the two of you should agree upon, though. I think if you're happy with what goes around comes around, if you're going to ask this of me, you should also do that. That's fine. That's what you guys decide for your relationship. That's the beauty of relationships. You get to choose how you want to handle it yourself and then figure it out as you go. And if you choose to have, these are my boundaries and these are your boundaries, and I'm going to do everything that I can to meet your boundaries, and you're going to do everything you can to meet my boundaries, then that could also be fine. Because at some cases you would be more gracious, and in other places I'll be more gracious. But if you don't do that, then it becomes such a small boundary, and now life feels very limited. So I think it's very based on the couple in terms of that. And also I did mention, or I did make it sound as if when my partner says, hey, listen, here's my problem, and I'm just going to be like, happy days, and not question it. But knowing myself, that ideally or realistically isn't exactly how it's going to go through. I would very much, if they say this is how they feel, question it and discuss it with them, and try and find the root behind it. And after a very honest discussion with them, hopefully we can find the root of it. And if it's something that I know that they're maybe struggling with or dealing with or really trying their best to fix, and I can respect it as something that I want to respect, then I'm going to respect it. But obviously if they're being unreasonable in the sense of they are being on purpose to test how willing I am to sacrifice friends for them, then it's not about being reasonable. Then that's a whole other case. So yes, I'll definitely, as you mentioned, have deep discussions with the person and help them identify what it is, point out to them if they're being unreasonable, and try and help them work through insecurities if that's what it is. But ultimately I'm not going to force upon them that they have to accept it for me because I am accepting it for them, or that kind of thing, because that can be a very difficult thing in itself.
Okay, I think that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. The aspect though of emotional intimacy is very interesting to me, because I believe I can sit across from a table and still cheat in the way that I emotionally engaged with a woman. So do you think that you can cheat from across a table in terms of the types of discussions you have? You mentioned it earlier on in terms of asking for the advice or maybe sharing too much about your relationship. Where's the line of emotional cheating?
Okay, well, it's so dependent on your definition of it. Let's just think practically. Cheating will be when, or not emotionally, like physical cheating, will be engaging sexually uh, with someone else when when you're in a covenant or a committed relationship with someone else. So emotionally, that would be what is emotional cheating. It's, I would say personally, I can't say there's a rule of thumb for everyone, but for me, when I start considering or even having the thought of a potential future with them, or a potential what a relationship with them would be like, that would be actually not the thought itself, because I think the devil can very much attack you with a thought of that sort, but the entertainment of that thought I would consider cheating. So as soon as you are, for more than a second, allowing yourself to think about what it would be like to be in a romantic relationship with that person, I would say that is emotional cheating. And if it's a friend of yours and you're just having a nice conversation, and your conversation is just, you just get along so well, and you just all of a sudden have this thought of, we would have such polite kids, or whatever the thought, that's emotional cheating.
Yeah. I like your answer, but I think it's still a bit vague for someone to. I think it's good for looking within yourself, but if you saw two people interacting, I think you can kind of, you wouldn't then be able to use your definition to say whether these people are emotionally cheating with each other. Also, I almost want to call it light cheating, because, you know, cheating is such a heavy term. I think we should reserve it for when it's really happening. Otherwise, you know, it'll become a bit watered down. But this light form of emotional cheating, I almost want to say, is reciprocating any sort of like sexual or romantic interest with another person continually over time, which under the table kind of implies that, you know, if we were to engage ever, I would accept you. And I almost feel like that is the crux of when it all starts. So perhaps flirtatious comments being returned. This can be comedic once or twice, that you don't do it, but continuously that happening over time. And then also, let's say at work, you know, the whole traditional thing of work wife. A certain type of continuous intentional time spent with someone, I would consider emotional cheating. So let's say you're having lunch all the time with a particular woman at work that's not your partner, and engaging with them on an emotional level, sharing your emotional energy with them. I would start to consider that emotional cheating, and something that you should not, definitely not engage in. I mean, people think it's fine to do, but that's what leads to actual cheating. Is that, I want to say that emotional cheating is always the first step.
Yeah, it is, because you don't physically cheat as the first step. You don't just happen to be intimate with someone that you've never thought about being intimate.
Yeah.
You know, you've obviously had the thought, entertained the thought, and they likewise entertain the thought, and then it builds from there. So yeah, I guess you can consider emotional cheating as cheating, because the line isn't when you do the deed, the line is when you accept your willingness to do the deed, almost. And that's why I would say I would squash it at birth. If the thought comes, squash it. If you're not squashing it, why are you not squashing it? Why are you considering a future with someone else if you're truly that committed to your partner? And I would say a lot of people would argue and be like, no harm, no foul, it's just a thought. I'd say, well, go read the Bible some more, because it's not about just what you do, it's what goes on in the heart as well. I'll say it more polite though.
Okay. Oh, that's very nice. I think that was a good exploration into intimacy and the boundaries of intimacy, and perhaps some cautionary ways to look at your interaction with other people and whether that's appropriate or not, and perhaps a framework of how to decide whether you should have friends of a different gender within a relationship. A very controversial question, difficult to answer. very personal answer, I think, that we've given. But otherwise, thanks to everyone for listening. I hope we've spurred some curiosity around the topic of relationships. If you have any particular other questions about relationships for us, we'd love to hear them in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for listening.
Yeah, be safe out there. Protect your thoughts.
Be safe out there.